Hi there! Welcome to Cook Local, Eat Local, the podcast where you can find inspiration, tips, and recipes for enjoying more local food and drink. I am David Crowley, your host. In today's episode, we'll be chatting with Tamika Francis about the connection between food, culture, and identity, as well as her work to support a network of local food entrepreneurs. Tamika is a public health practitioner and culinary creative. She has worked in agritourism and as a chef instructor for both youth and adults. Through Food and Folklore, she pays homage to underrepresented global food traditions and explores belonging, identity, and the immigrant experience. She's currently building DutchPot.app, a suite of business tools and a social network for food entrepreneurs. Well, hi, Tamika. Welcome to Cook Local, Eat Local.
Hey, David, how are you doing today?
Great. It is so great to have you here. I've known you for a number of years through our both being working in the nonprofit sector, and I only probably several years ago stumbled across some of the very interesting as well as delicious things you've been up to in the food space. So I've been eager to have an excuse to talk to you more about your interests in that. So this is very exciting. So maybe before I get into asking you about some of the specific projects you have going, I would love to hear more because in our conversations in our other lives, I didn't know of your foodie interests. So I would love to know, you clearly exude a passion for food just in writing, what I've seen you write. And I'm curious and I know you're interested in the way food intersects with like culture and identity, stuff that's very interesting to me as well. So I'm kind of curious, like, is all that stuff a lifelong passion? Did it evolve? Tell me a little bit about the story as to what motivated you to be interested in these topics.
Sure, David. Thanks so much for having me. I know you were in the food scene as well, and this amazing blog you have for so long. So I was psyched to discover this other side of you. Quick like backstory. Social Capital Inc. SCI Dorchester was my first volunteer opportunity that became my first job when I moved to the US 15 years ago. So
wow, is that long ago?
yeah,
Wow.
is that long ago? Exactly. You've been doing this work for some time. But my own food story, that office was in Dorchester in Boston, and I felt like my American food story started there with the Vietnamese cuisine. But prior to that, I moved from Jamaica, grew up in Jamaica. Both grandparents on both sides, my paternal and maternal grandparents have been in the farming industry, just they farm. And so I kind of grew up in the farm sector, going for holidays with my grandparents. And I remember the first time I made the connection between farm and food on my plate. My grandfather paternal was slaughtering goats for a family gathering, and it was cleaned and carefully taken care of. And then there was beans and rice and plantains and all this food that was made. And then we had this amazing meal as a family together. And I remember the feeling I had of just this like joyful feeling of this like almost like a ceremonial orchestra, everybody playing their own part. And that memory stuck with me, of course, like dormant until I got to high school. I did a food and nutrition class and realized that, oh my God, I love this. I wanted to be a chef.
Wow.
1990s post-colonial country, right? Being a chef wasn't something you did. You went into college and you did something else. But it kind of stuck with me until I worked during grad school in St. Lucia with farmers and fisher folk and working in the food and farming and tourism sector. And as if that dormant memory just came back to me. That desire I'd had, that longing I'd had to want to be a chef, I'd somewhat forgotten it. You make food at home and that's it. And so during that work, I started to like play around with my own food. Like I'll cater events here and there, I'll organize little parties here and there. I started to like take it more seriously. Came back to the US, did some farm-based education, and then back in 2017, I decided to go to culinary arts program at Boston University. And that's where it was like, okay, this is where I belong. I want to write about food. I want to talk about food. I want to have conversation. And for me, since nostalgia, it's belonging and identity, like exploring those concepts through food and also exploring the idea of home, right?
Yep.
Home is where meals tend to happen. or the best
Mhm.
meals tend to happen. So I love to
Sure.
explore the identity behind home and food.
Wow. Okay. That I can see how the pieces come together. A little bit of a
Yeah.
roundabout path, but that strong seed was planted, it sounds like, through the kind of family communal meals that and I imagine you didn't sit there at that meal that you described thinking, "Oh, we're eating local food." You were just probably
No,
doing what came
no.
naturally, I'm guessing.
It took me years to recognize that was farm to table, that was locally sourced, that
Right.
was organic, that was, seasonal. Like
Hmm.
all the principles that, you talk about in your own work was in play. And so that stuck with me. Obviously I didn't recognize it then, but that stuck with me.
Hmm. Yes, and then so it sounds like food and folklore really builds on those themes. So I'd love to tell us a little bit more about that program. I know, like many things, it sort of got thrown a pandemic curveball, but
Yeah.
that's I think the first thing I saw that you were doing in the food space, and it sounds awesome. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. So yeah, food and folklore, I have an amazing friends group in the Boston area, from various parts of the country, various parts of the world. And I've hosted brunches and conversations at home, and they became somewhat regular. And then once I went to culinary school, I started to host them more formally. And so food and folklore became a pop-up dining series initially in 2018 through 19, ended right around March 2020. Um, and for me, food and folklore was my project that allowed me to, I have a daytime job in public health. It allowed me to be creative. It allowed me to tap into my farm network and source from the Urban Farming Institute in Boston
Hmm.
and the Food Project, and use those connections and relationships to then make amazing meals that told a story. So the idea
Hmm.
behind food and folklore is to explore global food traditions. I'm Jamaican heritage, I'm Caribbean, African diaspora, but most of my friends came from all over the world. And so
Yep.
we had similarities in our food stories. I had bananas one way. My friend from, Thailand or Filipino, they had another way. So the series of food and folklore became a global food traditions. A Peruvian
Mhm.
chef came on board,
Oh,
Islamic
nice.
dinner series. I mean, we did so many different and somewhat unique offerings for Boston. The
Hmm.
idea is to evoke conversation
Hmm.
and recognize or share commonalities in the food world and in conversation. And so we asked the question, what does home taste like for you?
Hmm.
Um, you could ask somebody where they work and how they lived and what school they went to, and that gives you some questions, some ideas of who they are. But asking someone what does home taste like usually leads them to tell you a really amazing story of who they are at their core. And
Yeah.
so it was a centering experience around communal dining, local sourcing, and supporting local entrepreneurs in the food sector.
Yeah, that sounds great. Can you elaborate a little? I mean, one thing I was curious about is when we think about, this connection, food, culture, coming together, and then also local food. I would imagine, some of these global cuisines. Have you been able to source? Is it hard to source ingredients locally, or you find that pretty doable? And any tips for doing that?
Yeah, I mean, as with very many things, we're evolving in urban spaces.
Mhm.
For a while, I worked with a nonprofit called The Move that brought urban kids out to different farms across Metro
Mhm.
Boston.
Yep.
And what we would see is most of the kids from the Boston Public Schools and the Somerville and Cambridge Public Schools, both Black and brown kids and other kids, often were looking for foods that were familiar for them,
Yep.
and they weren't always finding that.
Right.
But very many farmers and projects like the Food Project, the Urban Farm Institute, or Vision Farm, they recognize that need and started to cultivate um, for immigrant groups and for folks who, wanting to see their own food on a plate. So there's
Mhm.
just one plant, amaranth. It's
Yep.
called pigweed. And in 2013, I remember distinctly, it was a weed, right, on a
Mhm.
farm, like no big deal. You know, few years, almost 10 years later, it's one of the number one selling crops at the Urban Farm Institute because that's callaloo.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
For the folks from Africa,
Oh, yeah.
West Africa in particular, the Caribbean, are so they are so connected to callaloo
Hmm.
as I call it a kale-like
Hmm.
greens.
Right.
So
Yep.
very high in antioxidants,
Yep.
green superfood, breakfast. It can be for shakes and stews and soups.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was so important to our diet. And so farms are now growing in response to
Mm-hmm.
change in populations, change in community dynamics. And we're also teaching our neighbors about this new staple. It grows,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, because of climate change, we can grow a lot more,
Yeah.
somewhat subtropical varieties, but it also mean that you're serving populations who maybe didn't see themselves in the local food sector now.
Mm-hmm.
And it evokes conversation amongst neighbors about, hey, what's this? How do you use it? How can I use it? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
super excited for that. Beans in the Cape Verdean community that's
Yeah.
grown in Roxbury by the Food Project. So local food is evolving about what's available, but I think more neighbors and more folks are able to then see themselves in the American food system because of what's available these days.
That's awesome. I like the way food, like especially thinking of it that way, can be a source of helping people like connect to their own identity,
Yeah.
see themselves, but it also can be a bridge, like you're talking about. Like for instance, I had never heard of callaloo till I was at a farmer's market in Cambridge. I remember there was a guy that would always have callaloo, and I'm curious. I think the benefits of being food curious is a great way to learn, and I loved it. He told me I had to ask him how to prep it, and you might know better than I,
Yeah.
but it was great. And now I look for, occasionally I still get it in like a food share or something, but I was just
Mm-hmm.
thinking as you're talking, oh, I haven't had callaloo in a
In
while.
a while, yeah. And the reverse is true, right? So the cranberries in Massachusetts,
Hmm.
coming from the Wampanoag tribe, and being a major staple in Massachusetts, right? I'm not
Hmm.
familiar with cranberry except for canned cranberry sauce, but I too am learning as a new American about this very important economic crop, but also again high in antioxidants and like superfood.
Yeah.
So I'm also learning through this work of food and folklore about what's native and hyper local to the New England region.
Hmm.
And I'm able to try on a cranberry sauce that for me is somewhat similar to a tamarind in
Oh
terms of
yeah.
that tart and
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
acidity.
Yep.
Um, my good colleague Irene and I had done an event once, and I made like a goat with a roti, and she did like a cranberry. I was like, yeah, this is like roti with goat and a cranberry sauce, which is similar to a tamarind sauce.
Hmm.
So flavor profiles are similar,
Yep.
um, and you can then interchange or use alternatives in your local environment once you understand what the flavor profiles are.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. And it's obviously a good skill to have, to be able to see that similarity
Yes,
and
yes.
substitute like that. I do want to, I have a feeling we could talk about food and folklore stuff for the rest of our interview, but I know you're working on an exciting new initiative, really supporting, as I understand, local food entrepreneurs now in the Portland area through your new project. So tell us about it and the vision. I know it's evolving vision, but I want to hear more.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Thank you for asking. Yeah, so I mean, coming out of food and folklore as a solo entrepreneur, a micro, and by solo and a micro, I mean, I had amazing colleagues who'd help out, who'd volunteer. I do believe in paying people fairly, so very often I had a little resources to pay someone, back of house. But I recognized there was this amazing need amongst myself and others as entrepreneurs to be supported in community. And
Hmm.
so I belong to a strong community of entrepreneurs in the Boston area. We
Hmm.
depend on each other, we lean on each other to support each other's events and support each other in very many ways.
Yep,
And that's social capital, right? You know a thing
definitely.
or two about social
Oh
capital.
yeah.
The relationships are strong, and I can tap into that unspoken, like knowledge base. But further to that, I recognize there weren't very many tech-enabled solutions that would
Hmm.
support me as an entrepreneur to run my business solo or micro. If I owned a restaurant, there are quite a few point of POS systems.
Hmm.
If I was a graphic designer, there are a few online systems. And I kept looking for a solution that offered me back end support services to run a micro food entity that wasn't a brick and mortar, right? I'm not
Right.
physically located anywhere. I may use a shared kitchen one day, I may borrow a restaurant day, I may rent a space one day. And so DutchPot is premised on the idea that there are millions of micro and solo entrepreneurs globally, but also here in the US in particular in cities who have amazing talent and they want to do their caterers, their
Hmm.
culinary instructors, their
Yep.
mixologists. And I haven't found a tech solution. If somebody knows of one, please tell me. But
Yep.
I'm alongside my business partner, my co-founder, Will Turnage out of Brooklyn. We're building a tech-enabled solution to support micro food entrepreneurs in the way that we work. What
Yep.
do I mean by that? Some days I'm on a farm picking or helping to gather food. Some days I'm in a supermarket or a cheese shop, procuring items. Another day I'm in a kitchen cranking out some meals for a meal plan. And then I'm in my office or my computer space, a coffee shop, typing and writing. There are not very many technologies that go across those three environments.
Right.
I'm not anchored to a building. I don't own a building, right?
Hmm.
So we're building a platform that really sees micro entrepreneurs in the way that we work. It's a little bit unique
Hmm.
and can support us in that way, but also build community behind it so we can leverage social capital and the power of community to really build thriving businesses.
Yep. That sounds awesome. And so I know you mentioned you're now based in Portland doing the work. Is it like you're testing it there? Is it eventually something you're hoping to offer more widely? So folks, the audience for this is, we have some New Englanders, but also, folks from all over the country probably tuning in. So this is something they could look forward to potentially.
Yeah, of course. So we started the concept through a little bit of funding through Visible Hands, which is a VC-backed fellowship last year. And we tried on a few ideas in the Boston area. I had an amazing support network there. We wanted to take this outside of Boston and also test the same assumptions or test assumptions to see if we understood completely the market. So we got an opportunity through the Root Institute at Northeastern University, that's Boston based, but here in Portland, to try on this idea or to test the concept in another thriving food city, which is Portland, Maine. Smaller city, has a very town-like feel, but
Hmm.
per capita, the food scene here is amazing.
Yeah.
So we've been talking to entrepreneurs here, observing, going to spaces. We're going to try and do a beta launch here in Portland first, and take
Yep.
it back to Boston and think about expansion from there on.
Great.
So
Something
I
that
mean,
it,
in my world, it's to become a national, it will move nationally and eventually globally as a big vision.
yeah.
But for now, we are trying this in the Portland area and Boston, and perhaps later on Providence, Rhode Island, being the
Okay.
very first city.
That makes sense. So in the meanwhile, for folks that aren't in those territories, one of the things I was thinking about, if somebody's listening and thinking, I think somebody attracted to listening to this is like, yes, I want to, have more of my food come locally. Some of our conversations have been about, the farm share and stuff like that. But, you have this focus on the food entrepreneurs, solo entrepreneurs, a lot of people from diverse backgrounds. Somebody who thinks, in theory, I'd like to find and support more such local business folks, entrepreneurs. Any suggestions on how to go from getting most of your food, if somebody's listening, getting most of their food maybe from more, bigger chains, whether it's a grocery store or a restaurant, how to seek out and really embrace the local foodie entrepreneurs that are in your network?
Yeah, great question. So I'll do a shameless plug. I mean, DutchPot.app, so
Yep.
DutchPot.app is our website. Right now, we're
Yep.
just there's a mailing list there. You can join that. We do share some nuggets. If you're
Great.
a food entrepreneur, you want to have a conversation or complete your survey, we'd love that.
Great.
But I immediately think about for the consumer, right?
Hmm.
Wanting to support more local. Most major cities have a shared commissary kitchen or incubator.
Yep.
And most of them I noticed either have a direct to consumer page where they're selling local produce,
Yep.
whether it's jams and jellies and pickles and sauces
Hmm.
and baked goods, right?
Yep.
I like to try those pages at my first go. Here in
Yep.
Portland, Maine, it's called Fork Food Lab. In Boston, it's Commonwealth Kitchen.
Yep.
But most major cities have one or two of those.
Yep.
So that's a great place to start. It's where most food trucks also belong to if you want to have
Right.
like
Right.
a ready to eat meal.
So you would maybe
So
Google
I
like
start
shared kitchen, or is there any like
your
clearinghouse for
kitchen,
those?
commissary kitchen.
Yep.
A resource I like to use is called Pick Your Own.
Hmm.
It's a hodgepodge. It's not sexy. I don't know who owns it. They could do some work over there, but Pick Your Own tends to list both Pick Your Own farm shares in like all cities, but they also have a resource guide that
Yeah.
lists
Oh, okay.
commercial
Cool.
kitchens, how to start a home food business.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Nice.
these folks are not paying me, just so you know, but I've just find myself going to their website to
Yeah.
like look for wineries and orchards, and
Hmm.
I love picking strawberries and blueberries.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Um, so to find in any town or any state I'm in, who's
Hmm.
available and where the farmers markets are or where things are to find local food, I find myself going back to the website very often.
That's a great resource. It sounds like before
I don't
I
know who
almost
owns it, but it's ugly, but it's
okay,
great resource.
cool.
It's like they have it's a clearinghouse of sorts.
We've been talking about a lot of great ideas. I do ultimately, we do have a lot of foodies that just want to hear. Could you give us an example? And I don't know if you have any recipes or links to recipes on either of your sites, but tell, if you started with a description of a meal that really inspired you, and we've touched upon some different kinds of preparations, but is there anything delicious you've made recently that you'd like to give a pat on the back to yourself for that's delicious? Maybe some tips if somebody wanted to replicate anything that you've cooked in your own kitchen or at one of the shared kitchens,
Uh,
or if you want to shout out some other places, some other good food you've eaten that
oh my gosh. So on Monday I had the opportunity to go to a BostonChefs.com event that was a lamb thing.
Mm.
Supported by the American Lamb Association, because I'm really into goats, right? And goats and
Yeah.
lambs are cousins, so I can
Okay.
do the cousins.
Yeah.
And there was an amazing chef there who did a shawarma, a lamb
Okay.
shawarma.
Yep.
It was
Mm.
delicious with the pita and tzatziki. It was just a beautiful, nicely done shawarma. So I'm really into lamb and goat. I think the last thing I've made that I really got excited about was I was trying to then I got this book. It's a boards book by L. Simone Scott.
Hmm.
Um, America's Test Kitchen. So it has a beautiful, like, I am not so good at plating, but
Yeah.
I went out and bought like the jams and the jellies and the sauces and the chutneys.
Oh
And then I
yeah.
practiced from that book to make like a beautiful board. So I didn't
Mm.
make anything per se, but just the art of gathering beautiful, like well done local like produce and local strawberries and local cheeses, and then plating that was very
Hmm.
therapeutic, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so beautiful. But I also got like this beautiful bouquet of like samplings of all kind of local cheeses and local
Ooh.
chutneys. I got a chutney from Lindigo Spice. They're
Hmm.
from Commonwealth Kitchen. They had like
Oh,
a
nice.
pineapple chutney. I got some cheese in the Boston Public Market. I'm blanking on their name. But it just forced me to go and find local products to put on this beautiful board. And the boards
Oh.
book showed me how to do it.
Oh,
So
that
that's
sounds
my last project.
that sounds like a great project, and I think it's a good example of how you can really support. I mean, in doing that, you're supporting and trying a lot of different local food businesses, and and it's also kind of simple, right? It's not spending hours in the kitchen, which is supposed to be 102 here tomorrow. So
Exactly.
definitely stuff like that. I mean, sometimes those of us that are into cooking think I sometimes got to remind myself not to overcomplicate stuff. Sometimes
Hmm.
that kind of, I mean, it's simple preparation and presentation can be delicious and aesthetically pleasing too. It sounds like yum.
Yeah, and we're thinking about I mean, I hate to say it, but the fall season is coming, right? And
Hmm.
so you're entertaining, so kind of thinking about like simple ways to pull together both local produce, but also get folks involved. That could be an easy like family thing to do with someone. So I did like the idea of this board book with local produce
Yeah.
as an activity that required not as much cooking, but lots more like thoughtful like placement. And
Yeah.
then it forced me to then source. I want to have a boring board. So it forced me
Right.
to source amazing, like great, high quality products, right?
Yeah, that sounds like a great project. Great idea. Super. Well, you
Yeah.
have mentioned, can you remind us, just in closing, I think you said your website earlier, but give us highlights, where to find you on the web, if you're active anywhere on social, people connect with you to follow your journey and all the good stuff you're
Sure,
doing.
sure, sure. And I like to say I'm a geriatric millennial, which means I'm not great on socials. But it's at Food and Folklore, so food FOOD and letter N
Yeah.
folklore. For DutchPot.app, That's where I'm really trying to get folks, especially those who are food entrepreneurs. We want to hear from you, want to hear how you work, how we can support your work. So it's DutchPot.app, and we have a mailing list there and also a survey. But I love chit-chatting with people. You shoot me an email. My website has all the details. I do love hearing from folks, especially those who are at the intersection of food and culture and like really trying on new things. I love to hear from folks in that regard.
Well, that sounds wonderful. And I actually got one of your newsletters today. I can say very, some newsletters you get, I mean, you get a lot, some are just a little boring. It definitely had a lot of personality to it and good info. So I look forward to getting that in my inbox, and would encourage people interested to get onto your website and sign up. And we do show notes related to the conversation, so we'll put links to that in there. So if folks that are driving or something and didn't write down your
Be
website,
safe.
they can go to the show notes and get them. So this has been so much fun,
Great,
Tamika,
thank
to
you.
catch up and hear about your project, and wish you well, and I look forward to following it.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, David. And again, your work around social capital was my entryway into building community around folk. The principles of social capital have stayed with me. So it's like an amazing, like, full circle to come back to this conversation with you and what you're doing with local food. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Cook Local, Eat Local. To get the show notes with links for recipes and resources we covered today, go to cooklocaleatlocal.com to get the podcast landing page. And please be sure to subscribe to Cook Local, Eat Local wherever you get your podcasts. Make it a great day with some tasty local food on your plate.